Yes.
So can you talk to us about the practicalities of...
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you to our ACL to come and join the speaker. I already practiced digitalization tools here in Africa, okay, on the other side, on the west side, but we was using, as said by my two panelists, the tools to exchange data easily between the various people and the various stakeholders. For example, when you have a project with multiple sites in Europe, in US, here in Africa, to build a new project, we need to exchange data. And also when the time, so we are using schedule with what we call 5D, so with 5 dimensions. So with the BIM and the 3D model to exchange the data. This is important that it is planned from the beginning of the project, because of today we cannot ask a contractor to make this kind of implementation at the end of the project or when the project is started. Why? Because you have to think how to implement what is the organization that you want to put in place and to exchange data. Means a lot of organization at the beginning to plan with the law how you are going to structure your project and after to hand it over to it. For example, on some of the tools we have document management, so not only for letters, but was for everything, engine documentation, vendor documentation. It is helpful after to exchange data between the parties, with your client or with the contractor or your subcontractor. And also it will help to ask questions between the various entities, because in a project we have a lot of interfaces, and these interfaces can come to the claim or to the dispute, okay? Because you have said during the contract that I'm going to deliver you this area at that date, and in fact you are in delay and it's impacting not only your contractor but also the subcontractor of your contractor. So today digitalization is going to is an help to provide to everyone the same information. The same level of information at the same time. And this will help also all the people to have the same data. So when you are going to do the commissioning or the handover to a project, all the data, when you are going to check if it has been requested, you can have all the information in your phone and check it. So today what is important is to privilege the digitalization, because instead of to have papers, you can have your phone, and here now in Africa you make a big jump with this one, if I compare when I started in Africa 15 years ago. So I think it is important that the continent is continue to improving, and to use data and apps can be helpful for the project.
Thanks, Johan. So we've just been talking about how digital technology innovation can facilitate efficiency, quality and sustainability. But Sylvia, can I bring you back in? What are the main drivers we're seeing for the deployment of innovation and digitalization in Africa's construction sector? And what's the part currently played by construction law, particularly in your local experience?
Thanks, Stephen. Now I'll really try to be brief this time. The drivers for innovation and digitalization, I'm sure you can imagine what they are. You know, the technological advances, of course, you know, the globe is really leapfrogging on the front of technology. And Africa, we are being forced to leapfrog along with it. We have changing customer needs and demands. Our customers are travelers, and they know what they want by the time they come to you. So you're forced to really upgrade your capacity. There's intensified market competition. I don't even need to go into that. Changing business environments. Again, you can you know, let your imagination go around with that. Previously, you'd find that it's mostly cost efficiency that drives innovation and digitalization. But now we have other issues like sustainability, which we just discussed earlier today. We are being forced to have more environmentally friendly infrastructure and buildings, and it's forcing us to be innovative and to use technology as far as we can. One of the biggest drivers is time constraints. And I can tell you, because in our Kenyan context here, with, you know, every 5-year political cycle, you have 3.5 years before the next election cycle. So we are always having this time constraint that you want to make sure your project achieves the most within that time period, but also because our clients are always in a hurry for whatever reason. Now, some of the barriers, I'm sure there are many other drivers we could think of. We could have even opened, you know, the room to hear your contributions on this, and maybe if we have time, you could. But the barriers, if I'm to look at our context here, one of the biggest barriers to innovation is money, of course, finance. I think there was a panel that discussed issues of money earlier, I think yesterday, if I'm not wrong. If finances are lacking, then research and development, training and marketing will be hindered. And that's what we call innovation discrimination. So we face that, you find that that is a big barrier here in the country. In as much as many of our consultancy firms, contractors would like to, they have this particular barrier that, that they face. The lack of infrastructure and deficiencies in training systems, and, as always, the outdated legislation that does not encourage a citizenry to keep going out and further away in search of this innovation and digitalization. Training is a big deficiency because, again, the lack of, we don't have the expertise locally here. We have to look for it outside, which then is costly. So there are those challenges. And then what role does construction law play in all this? Now, if we were to just give the statistics of the continent, I'd just love very quickly just to highlight that Africa has a population of over 1.4 billion. And this is expected to double in 2050, reaching to 2.5 billion people living here in Africa. Our GDP, 2.6 trillion, that was in 2022, and it is expected to grow. The research here I have is 4%, but I remember at the ICC conference when we had our keynote speaker, he mentioned something like 2.6%. Some other research will say probably 3%. But you can see the growth trajectory that is going to happen in our continent. If I was just to give, again, our landmass as Africa, 11.7 million square miles. I don't know if you can envision how big that is, but it is actually 20% total land area on Earth. Why I'm giving you this is just to give you the potential that is there in this continent. Our population, which forms about 17% of global population, is largely becoming urbanized, which means a lot of infrastructure is required to house the growing population and the growing urban areas. Therefore, investment in construction in the continent, as it is growing, we need the construction law to grow with it. Otherwise, then it becomes a hindrance to promotion of the innovation and the digitalization that is supposed to, bring the efficiency then that is required to help with the growth of the construction sector in the country. So the construction law space has required significant lobbying. That's why we are here discussing it. That's why we are saying maybe we need a whole day's conversation about this, because we need the innovation, digitalization, and creativity space to be realized. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia. Just before we move forward to John, Kevin, did you have a couple of points on barriers and drivers?
Yeah, I think the only point that I wanted to make was one that was, just to expand on one that was made yesterday but by Nick about the mandatory requirement of technology being a driver for the use of BIM on projects, and that is undoubtedly the way that other countries have gone about in making sure that the BIM is adopted and that the use of it is increased. But I think when we do that, that is certainly a driver, but we need to be careful that it doesn't exclude small and medium enterprises. That the level of adoption, that if a government or public institution introduces the mandatory requirement of BIM at a certain level, they need to consider the capability of the supply chain out there, and if they have the skill set, or if it is going to be overburdening for the smaller and medium enterprises at that level to undertake that.
That's a good point. I remember in the UK when BIM became a buzzword and all the local authorities wanted BIM to be used, but no one had considered how it was going to be paid through all the way through the supply chain. So you got architects like Sylvia who could afford it using BIM, but some of the smaller suppliers not being able to feed into that. So when we talk about drivers and barriers, there's many facets to consider. I'm going to bring John in because, in the course of encouraging innovation and adoption of digital technology, we also have to think about regulation and protection in the context of the ownership of emerging technologies and the use of the data that comes out of that.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Hi, everyone. My name's John Woolley. Very pleased to be with you here today. Believe it or not, I've spent 15 years now in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, doing infrastructure projects. And I'm a front-end transactional lawyer. I'm not doing the disputes at the back end. I'm trying to put the FIDIC contracts together at the beginning of these transactions, some of which you've seen here today, some of these large energy projects, airports, PPP projects, some of which we get there and happen, some of which fall over and we spend years trying to do. And we spend ages trying to get these contracts negotiated. But I just want to flip on, before I turn to your question, to something that somebody we've all heard about has recently said. And this somebody is our best friend, Mr. Musk. So Mr. Musk said that he guessed that by the end of next year, and I think he's speaking last year, that we will have AI that's smarter than any one human. And he then went on to say that within the next 5 years, the capabilities of AI will probably exceed that of all humans. Now, we've got to take Mr. Musk with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but if we're about to be overwhelmed with this tidal wave of AI that is going to be cleverer than all of us, how do we stand up as construction lawyers? And what is our job as construction lawyers? Is our job as construction lawyers to enable that? Or is our job as construction lawyers to limit it? How do I, with my FIDIC Yellow Book, deal with Mr. Musk's tidal wave of AI that is about to dominate us all? Well, the answer to that is the answer to Stephen's question. Because what Stephen is talking about what Stephen is asking me is, how are we going to regulate? How are we going to regulate all of this data? And that's going to be on various different levels. But I've just used the magic word there, which is data. Because from an AI perspective, we're looking at, where does AI meet our favorite thing? Where does AI meet a contract? We don't necessarily see that in the press. Nobody's really probably particularly interested in that out there. But a contract is a very, very powerful thing in a jurisdiction where it can be fully enforced. And what that means is that through our contracts, we have a huge ability to impose on the way in which, the extent to which we want to be AI to be an enabler, or we want to be able to constrain the way in which AI develops in our particular sector. Now, I don't think we want to be constraining it at all. I think we want to be using contracts as an enabler for this amazing power that is about to descend upon us, this amazing visibility we're going to have to be able to a superpower, if you like, to be able to develop our abilities in construction law. But just back to the question is, how do we regulate? And I think the answer to that is, we do regulate with law passed through our parliaments, with law passed on data, with law passed on safety, with law passed on standards. And I'm not using the word AI on any of those things, but AI is becoming, or is about to become, inherent in all of those individual elements. And then, once we have established where we want to be in those particular areas, we then have the power of the contract, as I say, to limit the way we want to use these new technologies in any particular context. And at the moment, the power of the contract is down to some very familiar clauses. It's going to be down to the IP clause. It's going to be down to the data regulation clauses. It's going to be down to indemnity provisions. It's going to be down to some very old-fashioned things that we're probably very, very familiar in talking about. In the context of BIM, it's going to be down to BIM protocols, which will set out in detail the contractual basis on which everybody's going to engage in relation to BIM. But we're going to be using all these provisions with the knowledge of machine learning at the moment, with the knowledge of what machine learning is about to be able to do. And we really want to be thinking about both how